48 miles to target. ETA 9.5 hours.
Welcome back. In this video, we are going to take a look at the off-road performance of this INEOS Grenadier. What? Oh, you noticed. There's no INEOS Grenadier there. That's a story inside of a story that I'm going to get to in a little bit. But before we do that, I'm going to talk to you about how we tested this INEOS Grenadier, where that INEOS Grenadier is today, and what we think of the off-road performance of the INEOS Grenadier. So stick around. You're not going to want to miss this story because you're going to see some awesome video of Baja, Mexico. You're going to learn about the Mexican 1000 Safari Expedition, and you're going to see what kind of sideways we got into with our INEOS Grenadier. So come on, let's take a look. The last thing that we did before crossing the border into Baja, Mexico was to ensure that all the routing information that was provided to us by NORRA was downloaded into our devices. NORRA Mexico 1000, as you can imagine, is a 1,000-mile off-road race down the length of the Baja Peninsula. This year it ran from Ensenada to San Jose del Cabo. It is open to all different classes of vehicle, as you can see in these videos, from vintage off-roaders to modern cars to buggies to UTVs. It was just a really neat environment to be around and see all the enthusiasts. The class that we ran in was the Safari Expedition class, which is a non-competitive class for street legal vehicles, and brought a great group of people that wanted to come down and experience the trails and have fun. And from the moment we hit Ensenada, the party started and everybody was revved up to have a great time heading down the peninsula. Day one started with a short drive to the first trail. Everyone stopped, we aired down the tires, and frankly, we kind of got to know one another. There was a group here that had traveled before together, but there were also some folks that were new. So this was a great opportunity to kind of say hello and start to meet people and also see what other vehicles were in the class. And as you can see, these Myers-Manx buggies were some of the coolest trucks that we saw. They looked like a blast, and the groups that were driving them were just awesome. What a friendly bunch of folks these guys were. And they were so enthusiastic about their buggies. And the rest of the class was made up of a various grouping of vehicles. We had Raptors, we had Explorers built up. We had Broncos, both modern and vintage. We also had Jeeps. It was just a great mix of vehicles. One thing I will say is that we were the only unmodified vehicle in the group. I think we had the only stock suspension. We most definitely had the smallest tires. And at one point, I was not sure what we'd actually gotten ourselves into, because some of these guys looked like they were ready to go. But at the end of the first day, we realized that there was nothing to be concerned about. Everybody got to go at their own pace. So we, as you can imagine, generally brought up the back of the field, but we made it through every one of the trails. We didn't have any problems. And at the end of the day, we were able to get back together with all the other vehicles and folks and see how their day went, learn how their vehicles performed, and candidly, there was a lot of work being done. Once everybody got aired down, we hit the road. Initially, we had some pretty reasonably good graded gravel road, and as you can see, dust was our constant companion along this trip. But very quickly, we got into a little more rutted road. We got into some more runoff areas where the washes created some big divots in the road. And as we came down the hill, we had this spectacular view of the ocean. Now, we had to go pretty slow through here. The Grenadier, although it's built for this kind of terrain, is not built to go fast over this type of terrain. So we were bringing up the tail, but the Grenadier did extremely well. It was comfortable, it was smooth, relatively as smooth as it could be going over that type of terrain, of course. And we just had a great time heading down towards the beach. some great off-roading the first morning, the entire group stopped at the Pirates Cove restaurant for a Mexican buffet and some cold drinks. This stop was timed perfectly as it gave everybody a chance to sort of casually get to know one another better, have some conversations about the trail and the vehicles, and the location itself was just fantastic, right on the ocean. It was a great stop and everybody enjoyed the opportunity to get out of the vehicles and enjoy some sunshine. After lunch came an opportunity that I was really looking forward to. Being from the Midwest, we don't get the chance to drive on beaches very often. So the opportunity to drive 10 miles of beach was really exciting to me. And I've got to say the Grenadier did exceptionally well. Nothing slowed it down, nothing overheated, everything was great on the beach. And day one came to an end driving off the beach and heading into El Rosario.
Cerveza time!
I'm not going to complain about that.
Oh, I thought you will say no.
Cheers. Day one is done. We just arrived at the Baja Cactus Hotel in El Rosario, and it is time to relax and have some good food.
Brush off the dust.
And brush off the dust, yes. Day two started with a change of scenery. We were into some gorgeous boulder and cactus country. And at the end of day one, we realized that some of these trails are pretty brutal on vehicles. We had one DNF on the beach for a transmission failure, and El Rosario evening was spent by many repairing their vehicle, including rewelding shock mounts and fixing torn off exhaust systems. We also had the opportunity to experience one of Baja's more famous traits, and that is fueling up on the roadside using a 5-gallon gas can and a 55-gallon drum that holds the fuel. We were able to get some fuel here at this stop, but it was a unique experience. After fueling up, we headed to the dry lake bed, which would give the Grenadier its chance to let her rip down here in Baja. We also came across a Jeep Wrangler that had lost some teeth in its rear ring gear, and they were taking those gears out and continuing the race in two-wheel drive. The innovation and resourcefulness of this group was amazing. Coming off that dry lake bed, we found one of the limitations on the Grenadier's suspension, and that is lack of upward travel in the front suspension. When we hit some of these compressions, we hit those bump stops pretty quickly. Now, despite that compression issue, when you got the Grenadier in its element, such as this steep uphill with lots of sort of camber adjustments, this climbed that hill like a mountain goat. It took it in stride. It was not taxed in any way. It had plenty of power and plenty of articulation to get up that hill. And as we mentioned, this course was not an easy course, and one of the most unfortunate events of the entire trip was this Ford that sprung a leak somewhere and caused a fire. It ended up being a total loss, and our hearts go out to the folks that were driving that vehicle. Luckily and fortunately, everyone got away okay. No one was hurt. It was just a property damage, but still unfortunate.
Rocky and Broken Uphill.
After taking everything the Baja Trails could throw at it, the Grenadier finally met its match, which was the tube bumper of another truck that backed into it at the Pemex station, taking out not only the bumper but the transfer case cooler. Luckily, a quick field fix and a lot of teamwork got us to Torno Grupo La Industrial, a small machine shop where an excellent mechanic dropped everything he was doing and was able to effect a repair that got this transfer case cooler back in action. We were thankful for the great group we were traveling with who stuck with us and helped us get the repair effected. In fact, they even provided a little bit of entertainment as some of the racers came by. Our chase crew lead was able to welcome them in style as they drove through the city. And as we neared the end of the day, unfortunately, another mechanical issue struck, and we ended up having to tow a vehicle off the trail and into the final finish for the day, which broke the cardinal rule of never driving in Baja at night. But once we got to the location, the owner of the restaurant was fantastic, fed us, and gave us a cerveza. The next morning, we found ourselves back on the trail with more rocks and sand. It was all around a great driving experience that really was able to test the Grenadier in all sorts of circumstances. And the ability to field repair a steel rim cannot be overblown. In this case, we caught a rock and were able to straighten it up. And one of the most enriching parts of the whole journey was the enthusiasm of the locals for the race. In this case, we were able to hand out suckers to all the kids along the track. Many people were handing out their team stickers, and overall, the entire population seemed to really enjoy having us there.
2 miles to target. ETA 12.9 hours.
And what a sinking feeling in Baja when you lock your keys in your truck. Finished our last stint of dirt on the Mexican 1000. Everyone's at the Pemex. We just filled up, but I thought as somebody had asked me about what we had to do to the truck to get it ready, for the most part, everything is totally stock. We really did nothing to the truck, but we did have to put in some electronics. So the first thing we had to put in is the race control computer. It's called the Stella unit. So that we had to put in, and it gives us speed and range and beeps at us mercilessly.
78 miles to target.
Second thing we did is we mounted the phone, and we're using an app called Lead Nav, which is designed for racing. It's great. It calls out waypoints, but we also have our Garmin Overlander as a backup. And we do have an inReach in the back in case anything happens, although we always have a chase truck. And we got this mount, I'll link it below. That came from Amazon, and it's pretty good. It's not the best mount, but it's a pretty good mount. And the last thing we had to do was to put a chase light on, which is an amber light to make sure that people can see you in the dust. And the beauty of this Grenadier is we simply had to wire it using a Deutsche plug to the pre-wired outlet, and it's controlled from inside the truck, so the thing works great. Oh, one thing I did forget, we also had to purchase and install
3 feet to waypoint.
a race-ready radio. This one is by Rugged Radios, and it has all the race frequencies pre-programmed in. Lots of chatter while you're on course. And one thing I can't emphasize enough is how good the food is at these local vendors. The entire safari participant population, I think, made this lady's morning when we rolled in, and everyone was enjoying her quesadillas and burritos. Just fantastic food.
This is S36. Thank you
And
so much.
we made
Great
it.
job.
The finish line in Cabo, San Jose del Cabo. Hey!
Stay on the hard back and we'll be good.
We made it! We made it!
You made it. Welcome to Cabo. Yeah, there's no
Thank
free
you.
screw.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm so glad you guys are here.
I know, me too!
Yeah, exactly.
Oh yeah!
Oh yeah!
Over here, man. Thank you!
And at the finish line, everybody was having a great time, including the bartenders. What a fun event. And it was at the point where we were leaving the event that our second disaster struck. The Grenadier failed to start. It was towed to the hotel, and the next morning, it was towed to Cabo San Lucas, where it was put on a truck. So sadly, as you saw, the Grenadier, after crossing the finish line, we parked it, it failed to start and had to be towed. The next morning, we took it to Cabo San Lucas. It went onto a truck, and as of time of filming, I know that it has reached Tijuana, and we're waiting for it to cross the border and end up at Mossy INEOS in San Diego so that we can get the thing diagnosed and started. When I talked to the mechanic, he thought that it sounded like it could potentially be bad fuel. I'm hoping that's what it is, because I would be disappointed if something actually went wrong with the Grenadier after doing hundreds of miles of some pretty intense off-road, and then to have something just give up the ghost at that point. But we're waiting to see, and hopefully we'll know soon. How did the Grenadier do off-road? What's my perspective? I'm going to caveat it by saying we did not test it in deep mud, as you know, and it is not a rock buggy. I think in deep mud, it could use a little more ground clearance to avoid clogging up some of that cooler space that's lower on the vehicle. But I think it would make it through. I don't think there would be a problem. On rocks, on real rocky terrain, I think the lack of ground clearance would be a hindrance. I think it goes through things amazingly well, but I think that it could use some more ground clearance. We did catch the rock sliders on a couple shelves as we came off them going down the hills. Now, for the terrain that we were in, and as you saw, we had rocky river bottoms, steep up hills, sand, silt, big rocks, sharp rocks. People lost tires out there. And we had a lot of failures. So in the video, you saw the ring gear being broken on the Wrangler. We had shock mounts break, exhaust systems go bad, vehicles getting towed out. The amount of effort people put in to fix these vehicles as they broke was amazing. The teamwork, the ingenuity, the mechanical experience of these guys that were on this run was unbelievable. And watching the camaraderie and everybody pitching in to help was amazing. What do I think of the Grenadier off-road? What's my opinion of it? I think in its element, and that is sort of at a proper pace for the suspension, that vehicle is unbelievably good. The power was always, seemed like right where you needed it. It had all the grunt that it needed to go up the hills, to get through the sand. The transmission, as I said in my driving video, just always seemed to be in the right gear. It never gave us any reason to pause. On the sand, it kept pace with the other vehicles. It was able to get through that sand the whole time with The transmission and the transfer case not heating up at all. The cooling package that they have on that thing is stupendous. Now, after the fender bender, I would say that it's also vulnerable, but it did everything really well. On the rocks, as long as you were going slower, it just crawled over everything. There was no drama at all in the rocks. It climbed over, it climbed up. The suspension articulated extremely well. Sadly, we couldn't get any videos outside the vehicle because we were in a group of traveling vehicles and they were keeping pace. Some of the times we had to get off the track because the race trucks were coming behind us. So it wasn't like we could jump out, spend a bunch of time setting up cameras and that, but everything we threw at it, that vehicle just took in stride. I mean, I guess that's the best way I'd say it. Everything was just taken in stride with no drama. It just climbed, dug through, climbed over everything we threw at it. Where I think it could use tweaks, as you saw in the one video, the down compression and the up travel in the front suspension is, in my mind, too limited. It needs a little bit more travel in the front end. When we found compressions, it tended to hit the bump stops pretty quickly and a little bit harshly. So I would say that that's an area I would like to see improved on this vehicle. The other area is on some of the sandy whoops. As it was coming off the whoops, the back end would tend to, I'd say, bucking bronco. I'm not sure what you would call it, but the rebound seemed to be less controlled than I would like it. It just sort of wanted to bounce up in the air, and as you could see, we were doing some pretty good bouncing in the truck. But that's I think, a really small niggling item because, again, that doesn't happen unless you're at some pace. If you're taking it slow, this thing, I think, could hit any trail in the world. And as an overland vehicle, not a rock buggy, certainly not a mud bog machine, this thing just is in its element. There's nothing that it could be thrown at it. As you saw, other vehicles had mechanical issues. There was no mechanical issue on this truck on the trail. I'm not going to count the bumper against it, and certainly once it stopped, I'm waiting to see what happened to it. If it is bad gas, that is in no way the fault of the Grenadier, so we're waiting to find out. But the suspension, the frame, the steering linkage, everything was just solid. After hundreds of miles in that type of terrain, the body structure was solid. We had no squeaks, no rattles. You didn't feel the body flexing. You could tell the suspension was doing the work. And it just is, it's just a solidly built vehicle. And as you look at the suspension underneath, if you've seen some videos that kind of highlight that, you can see that it has got some heavy duty stuff in it, and you could certainly feel that on a trail. I think the Grenadier is a fantastic off-road vehicle in its element, and I would certainly recommend it on any reasonable overland terrain that you can imagine. If you like this type of content, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button in the lower right-hand corner. Give us a thumbs up and share this with your like-minded friends. And as always, take care, and once we get the Grenadier back, we'll see you outdoors.